here in Ninth Lit, and we're practicing the first 8 lines of the prologue. I'm going to play it again.
One that April with his sure sword, the draught of March, hath pierced to the road, and bathed every vine in sweet liquor, of which virtue engendered is the flower. One Zephyr's egg with his sweet breath, in spirit hath in every heart and head the tender croppets, and the young son hath in the ram his half course Irona.
All right, so I think we got a couple of minutes here. Why don't we practice it? I'll lead it. We'll just leave that up here. So we're going to practice that together. So get your copy out. I don't have my copy, but I think I know it pretty well. All right, so I'm going to start it, and I expect to hear you. All right. If you're practicing today, I'll have sympathy for you tomorrow. If you're not practicing today, you weren't trying yesterday, so I wouldn't have as much sympathy if you don't know it tomorrow. So let's follow me. I'm going to lead it. Ready? One that April with his shower sota, the drought of March hath pierced to the rota, and bothered every vine in switched liquor, of which thereto engendered is the flower. When Zephyrus eke with his sweeter breath, in spirit hath, and every holt and hath, the tender crocus, and the younger son that hath in the ram his halve course Irana. And I just want to point something out. It says, when Zephyrus eke with his sweeter breath, in spirit or inspired hath, and every holt and hath, the tender crocus, as a comma. And so I pause, because that goes together. If you try to read poetry and ignore the punctuation, you know what, the analogy, and I forget algebra, but you remember you have things in parentheses, and you have things outside of parentheses, and you have a particular order. And if you try to multiply things that are not together, you're going to get the wrong answer. Well, the same thing is true with poetry. If you try to put parts of one sentence with another sentence, it's going to be nonsense. And although the comma doesn't separate sentences, it separates an idea. So again, it should say, when Zephyrus eke with his sweeter breath, in spirit hath, and every holt and hath, the tender crocus, period, or comma, and the youngest son that hath in the ram his alpha course Irana. See, all that goes together, and it makes more sense. Even if you don't know what it means, it sounds like it makes more sense. If you haven't translated. So let's do it a couple more times, and I'll start it. One that April with his shower sota, the drought of March hath pierced to the rota, and bothered every vine in switched liquor, of which thereto engendered is the flower. When Zephyrus eke with his sweeter breath, and spirit hath, and every holt and hath, the tender crocus, and the younger son hath in the ram his halve course Irana. That sounds great. And you're 8, you're almost halfway through. So good luck tomorrow. Just keep saying it. That's the only way I learned it, is to just say it over, and you can find a copy of this. They're all going to sound similar. They don't have to sound exactly like this. But see what you can do with that. So let's get out your book, and we're going to, you never know. I always think every minute that we're here could be our last. After last spring, not to be too dramatic about it, but we didn't expect, we left on a Friday afternoon, we didn't expect not to come back until August. So I just think anytime we can utilize our time well, it's a good thing. So somewhere, if you will find your book, and I'll find mine. Another thing I recommend you doing is you're going to have to learn. Now, there are 30 pilgrims. I'm not going to really ask you about every pilgrim, but I bet there are 12 or 15, maybe half of them, maybe not even that many. Let's say half of them are significant. So I'm going to ask you to, and I'll tell you which ones they are when we get there. But you're also going to be writing about this. Let's assume we're going to have an exam at the end of the semester. I'll definitely include a question or more, but at least one question on the Canterbury Tales. And questions like, how does the prologue represent medieval England? And one way you can start answering that question is, well, because you have such a variety of jobs and personalities and character. Like, for instance, we've two military guys, the knight and the squire. We've seen three religious people, the nun, the monk, and the friar.
Well, the cleric.
The cleric is a student. Now, you can put him in that category. Yeah, he's a church student. But I kind of separated him, but that's all right. Yeah, you can put him in there. Then you have some, like, just regular jobs, like merchant, haberdasher, dyer, although we don't have any distinguishing details about any of them. Remember, we basically lumped them together. There are 5 jobs, and they talked about their wives. And, we're going to look at a doctor today. We're going to look at a cook and a skipper. So these are people not in the church. I'll get rid of this. They're not in the church. And right behind here are 2 words that are useful. One is clergy. You know what a clergyman is? Who are clergy? You know anybody that's a clergyman or woman? You never heard the term? Clergy means people that are ordained in the church. They're ordained by some authorized body to be a preacher, pastor, whatever you want to call them, assistant preacher or pastor. Even youth pastors can be ordained, but you have to go to seminary and you have to be ordained. In the Middle Ages, you could divide the entire population into clergy or laity. And so if you weren't a clergyman, you were a layman. That's assuming you go to church at all. And most people in the Middle Ages did. I've served on boards in churches, but I've never gone to seminary. I've never been ordained. I am a layman. I was part of the laity. So one division here are those people who are lay people, which a good many of them are, probably 2/3. But then there are a third of them that are at least, if they're not clergy officially, they're related to the church. So that's another way to look at this. So we're going to start, I think, we're B. So we got to start with the Franklin. And Dave, would you mind starting for us? I think we need to read him. He is, of course, not in the church. This is an occupation. It's also a position. Let me give you the definition. A Franklin, again, you need to write all these down. Anything that we say is fair game. So a Franklin is a free landowner who is not noble. And by that, not noble, that means he's not part of, I guess you could say he's not part of the peerage. He's not a count, a duke, a earl, whatever. He's not a noble person, not in that rank, but he does own land. And this particular Franklin is very successful. I'd say it's a step up from the yeoman. The yeoman seems pretty ordinary, small owner. The Franklin seems much bigger landowner. He's given more. And when you say he's free, he's not a vassal. In a sense, they're all vassals of the king, right? But not of some lord. So Dave's going to read about the Franklin, and right behind this screen, I have some, I think, interesting information about the Middle Ages. We'll spend a few minutes with. So, yeah.
There was a Franklin with him, it appeared. White as a daisy petal was his beard. A sanguine man, high-colored and benign. He loved a morning sop of cake and wine. He lived for pleasure, and had always done, for he was Epicurus's very son. in whose opinion sensual delight was the one true felicity in sight. As noted as St. Julian was for bounty, he made his household free to all the county. His bread, his ale, were finest of the fine, and no one had a better stock of wine. His house was never served of baked meat pies, of fish and flesh, and these and such supplies. It positively snowed with meat and drink, and all the dainties that a man could think. According to the seasons of the year, changes of dish were ordered to appear. He kept fat partridges in coops beyond. Many a bream and pike were in his pond. Woe to the cook, unless the sauce was hot, and sharp, or if he wasn't on the spot. And in his hall a table stood arrayed, and ready all day with places laid. As justice at the sessions none stood higher, he often had been member for the shire. A dagger and a little purse of silk hung at his girdle, white as morning silk. As sheriff he checked audit every entry, he was a model among landed gentry.
Well, I think I can speak for everybody. We all enjoy when Dave reads. And one thing I want to compliment you is I hear the words. That you pronounce the words better than I do. They're clear. And because you were reading some of these details, and it just kind of came alive for me. I don't know how many times I've read it, but when you hear the words, in other words, you do justice to the words. You're not trying to overdo the words or anything. You just simply let us hear them. I appreciate that. So let's talk about this guy. We know what he does. There are a couple of things about each one. What could you say? I'd say at least two things in general category. What can you say about this guy? Yeah.
He kept his home, his land open for people to come in and enjoy a feast.
Yeah, that surprised me. Well, generosity surprises me. Does it surprise you? Do you expect people to be generous? I think most of us do not. But here's a generous man, and he opens his home to people, and he has parties, and particularly like when you got my attention reading when you were talking about what he was feeding them. Maybe it's because I like to eat just like everybody does, so it gets my attention. So that's one thing. He's very generous. The other thing is kind of related to that. He said he was Epicurus's own son, and I wish I knew more about this. I know just enough to tell you. I wish I knew more. I don't even remember who Epicurus was, but I do know that an Epicurean is someone, and you need to write this down. He's an Epicurean. An Epicurean is someone with sensitive and discriminating tastes in food and wine. So someone who is an Epicurean has discriminating. In other words, he has very understanding. You've heard he's got a great taste in food. So it means he understands food, he appreciates it, and he wants the best in wine and food. Yeah.
Can you repeat the definition?
Yeah, sensitive and discriminating taste in food and wine. He can discriminate between good food and not so good food, between one wine and the other wine.
Don't you when you go wine tasting, you have to do 9 different steps? Like when you take a sip.
I've seen people do that.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny to watch them. They drink it. They actually, because if you drank too much of that stuff, you wouldn't be worth. You wouldn't be worth doing. But sometimes they spit it out because they're just trying to get. They're not trying to get the alcohol in them. They're trying to get the taste. And that's right. It's kind of a funny thing to see a wine taster. So those are the two things that stand out. Plus, you know what he is. He's a Franklin, but he's a generous man, and he loves food. And behind he says he was a sanguine man. And look at the board. I'll explain these in a minute. You see the word sanguine, the third word down? It means cheerful or optimistic. These are 4-grade SAT words. I think you probably know what melancholy means because we've already had it. Phlegmatic, sanguine, and choleric you may not know. But if you do, that's good because these are strong, I like to call them SAT words. And they do relate to the Middle Ages. You'll find out in a minute. All right, thank you, Dave. Hayden, do you mind reading? Let's see, there are five different tradesmen that are grouped together. So we don't get anything about each individual, but it says a haberdasher, a dyer, carpenter, weaver, and carpet maker. So Hayden's going to read that. Yeah.
Wait, could an Epicurean be also like someone who is very like particular about food?
An Epicurean is someone who has discriminating taste and sensitive taste. You know, it's not so much in comfort food. I'm not sure what comfort food is, but barbecue would be comfort food, I guess. It tastes good, probably not good for you, but it sure tastes good. But Epicurean probably wouldn't necessarily want to eat barbecues. But he can taste this, whatever, he can tell it. All right, so would you start with, you know what a haberdasher is? Yeah.
One who makes hats.
You know, you're not wrong, but I used to think that was all he was. But he's actually more than that. He's someone who sells men's clothing and accessories. But growing up, I always had that image in my mind. The haberdasher was the guy who sold the hats. And that is something they do sell. But there's actually more to it than that. The rest are explanatory.
A haberdasher, a dyer, a carpenter, a weaver, and a carpet maker were among our ranks, all in livery of one impressive guild fraternity. They were so trim and fresh their gear would pass for new. Their knives were not tricked out with brass, but wrought with purest silver, which avouches a light display on girdles and on pouches. Each seemed a worthy guest, fit to grace, a yield all with a seat upon the face. Their wisdom would have justified a plan to make each one of them an alderman. They had the capital and revenue, besides their wives declared it was their due. And if they did not think so, then they ought to be called madam is a glorious thought. And so is going to church and being seen having her mantle carried like a queen.
So he grouped all these because they're a member of the same guild fraternity. Do you know what a guild fraternity, a guild is? Fraternity, of course, is it's not a sorority, it's a fraternity. So it's a group of men, of males, that come together for one reason or the other. Yeah.
It was just like craftsmen who all like work together.
That's right. So even though they're different jobs, dyer, carpenter, weaver, carpet maker, they belong to the same organization that work for their benefit. You know, they help determine the standards and the prices, and you have to pass a certain rules. Didn't you study about the journeyman and the math? Did you study those yet? Have you studied those three stages? Kind of like the squire, the page, the squire, and the knight, but there are three stages. I can't remember what they are, that lead up to a master craftsman. You could be a journeyman, that's right below, and then below that. And so they determine what level of skill you have to be able to call yourself these. Anyway, so that's what they are, and they're really good. And the only thing that it really mentions here is about their wives. So what does it say about their wives? Yeah, hey.
They want them to become aldermen so that they can be treated like a queen.
This is so typical of human nature, that the wives here want the prestige that will come to them if their husbands become city councilmen or aldermen. So when they go to church and they go out, people will call them madam and treat them with a lot of respect. That's so typical of human nature. And we want the best for our spouse, but sometimes we might want it for our benefit. Like you might want to marry a rich person, so you get all the benefits of being married to a rich person. Like a famous person, you get all those benefits and so forth. Yeah.
Is this like what the woman wants? Is it like the same thing as being like a gold digger?
Well, that's a little. I think this is more natural than that. I think gold diggers, I understand it, somebody who, that's their only job, is to go find a wealthy guy to marry.
Because these are already married and they just want their husbands to get a better job.
That's a good, did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. I like that. All right, so we took care of 5 of them all together. Now we're gonna go to the cook, and Fiona's gonna read about the cook, and Freddie's gonna read about the skipper. And then we'll finish today with the doctor and the woman of Bath. We probably won't get much further than that.
They had a cook with them who stood alone for boiling chicken with an arrow bone, sharp flavoring powder, and a spice for savor. He could distinguish London ale by flavor. He could roast and seethe and boil and fry, make good thick soup and bake a tasty pie. But what a pity, so it seemed to me, that he should have an ulcer on his fingers. As for flavor, maybe it's the best.
All right, so very little about the cook. Sounds like he's a pretty good cook. But what's the one distinguishing characteristic of the cook?
It's a growth.
Something on his knee that, yeah, some sort of ulcer, some sort of wound, growth, something. That's what Chaucer does. He always gives some distinguishing mark of the character or the appearance of the person. Does anybody know what blanc mange is? Because Yuritsa last period knew what it was. I was very impressed. Anybody know what blanc mange? It has to do with the cook, so that gives you some idea. The cook makes it, so it's some sort of dish. I have to give Yuritsa credit again. I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up. It's a dessert, and that's all I know. And it sounds French. Blanc mange. But she knew that. All right, so Freddie's going to read about this skipper.
There was a skipper hailing from far west. He came from Dartmouth, so I understood. He rode a farmer's horse as best as he could, in a woolen gown that reached his knee. A dagger on a lanyard falling free hung from his neck under his arm and down. The summer heat had tanned his color brown, and certainly he was an excellent fellow. Many a draught of vintage red and yellow he drawn at Bardarts, while the traitor snored. The nicer rules of conscience he ignored. If when he fought the enemy vessel sank, he sent the prisoners home, they walked the plank. As for his skill in reckoning his tides, currents, and many another risk besides, moons, harbors, pilots, he had such dispatch, that none from hold to Carthage was a match. Hardy he was, prudent in undertaking, his beard in many a tempest had it shaken. And he knew all the heavens as they were, from Gotland to the Cape of Finisterre. And every creek in Brittany and Spain, their barge he earned was called the Nautilus.
All right, what distinguishes the skipper? What do you notice? I think he's a pretty good one. I mean, they all seem to be pretty good at their job, Freddie.
Well, it says he's an excellent fellow, and he's just like a, what is he? I don't know, does he have stuff to do with like ships or something?
Well, he's a skipper. Maybe we should have made that clear. What does a skipper do?
Manage a ship?
He sails the ship. He's the captain of the ship. As far as I know, there's nobody higher on a ship. In fact, on the high seas, the captain of the ship he has incredible authority. I mean, who's going to stop him, right? You're in the middle of the ocean. And so he's like, almost like God to these people. You know, he's in charge of every aspect of their life. But that's every skipper. What about this skipper? Yeah.
He seems more piratical, like a smuggler.
What made you think that?
Many a draught of vintage red and yellow he drawn at Bordeaux while the trader snored. The nicer rules of conscience he ignored. If when he fought the enemy vessel sank, he sent his prisoners home, they won't plank.
Yeah, I've overlooked that, but that is interesting. While the trader snored, he would get himself a little drink out of the, so it's like,
So
again.
I guess, I mean, he's more on the rowdier side?
Yeah, and because what does he do? And you know, every sailing ship had to defend itself. So even if you weren't a naval vessel, you had to have some way of defending yourself. Did you know that cargo ships are not allowed to carry weapons on board? Like you sail into a port in west coast of Africa, you know, some of the Arab countries there, you're not allowed to have weapons on board. But that was not the case in the Middle Ages or even in the 1800s. Sailing ships, there was always war going on. They had to be able to defend themselves somehow. So they even had cannon on board. But here, did you notice when he fought and the enemy vessel sank, what did he do to the prisoners?
Made him walk,
What does that mean?
like made him jump off and down.
And right, you know, so it says you mentioned the nicer rules of conscience he ignored, with kind of stealing a little wine from the wine dealer, or he had to feed them. He didn't have provisions to feed these guys, so just kill them. So he did. Anyway, those are a couple of things about this guy that you should know. The next two, which we'll finish on if we get both of them done, are quite interesting. We can go to Abby, if you would read about the doctor, and it's not that long, but there's several things we're going to point out. So.
Dr. Two emerged as we proceeded. He never left the talk as well as he did. On points of medicine and surgery for being grounded in astronomy. He watched his patient closely for the hours, went by his horoscope and made the powers. Favorable planets in Iceland, went on the images for his treatment. The cause of every malady you got, he knew, and whether dry, cold, moist, or hot. He knew their seed, their humor, and condition. He was a perfect practicing physician. These causes being known for what they were, he gave to the man whose medicine then and there. All of his apothecaries in the tribe were ready with the drugs he would prescribe, and each made money from the other's good. They had been friendly for a goodish while. He was well versed in
Yeah, these are hard. Esculapius, Hippocrates, Dioscorides.
Now dead and gone, Galen, Rod, Sir Leon, Averroes, Avicenna, Constantine, Scotch Bernard, John of Gaddiston, Gilbertine. In his own diet he observes some measure, though no particulars for pleasure. Only digestive merit, tears and such, he did not read the Bible very much. And he loved red garments, Scotch, British gray, and lined with composite he wear his way. Yet he was rather close as to Spencer and the golden horn was the old skin was the heart or so we're told, and therefore he had a special name.
So there are a couple of things we need to know, because we get an insight in this brief passage into medieval medicine. What could you say, based on the passage, was medieval medicine like? Yeah,
Superstitious.
I would agree. It's a mix of science and superstition. Why do you say it?
Well, because the phases of the moon and what constellations are in the sky don't affect your health.
All right, so notice it says astronomy. In fact, we wouldn't call it that. We would call it what? That's astronomy, what you just said.
Astrology.
Yeah, more astrology. The horoscope. Yeah, I just reading the details here. He would create a little image, almost like what do you call that doll you punch things into? A voodoo doll. It doesn't sound like, but he'd create an image of the person who was sick and hang it next to the bed, and then he would figure out when they were born and like what their horoscope is. I think in March it's Pisces, and they'd look at so he would look at the position of the planets and the stars, and somehow, if he gave you medicine during that particular time of the month, where it was favorable to you because of your birth, it would help you get well, and somehow the image is a part of that. So you don't need to remember all that, but I think mixing superstition, the horoscope, and then solid medicine, because notice he studies the great doctors. So that's a reasonable thing to do, to study other doctors and what did they say and how could they help you. So it's this odd mixture of superstition and science. Yeah, yeah.
Did you say that he's a good doctor?
By these standards, he is. Yeah. By the medieval standard. We just made the point. Remember at the beginning of the COVID, we were told you don't need to wear a mask? Now, they were wrong, I guess, but they sure changed their mind about it. But they were adamant, no, you don't need to wear a mask, not gonna do any good. Well, a month later or so, now, we're required to wear masks. And to their credit, they didn't understand the disease at first. I suppose they understand it now. We certainly ought to understand it better. So looking at the Middle Ages, they didn't get it like we do. But we're not right all the time either. We still don't have a cure for cancer. We don't even have a cure for COVID. There's arguments about it. We have a vaccine that we hope will really do the trick, but it's sort of hit and miss. So I just want you to understand about the medicine. And would you bother, since I bothered to write it on the board, would you bother to write this down? There's something else he was operating under, and they're called the four humors. And it was said that every person has elements of earth, water, air, and fire in them. And also the fluids in your body, there's several different kinds, blood being an example, phlegm being an example, bile being an example. It seems like there's another one. But your body has certain fluids that you were born with. Everybody has them. But if your body has more of one, these things aren't proportionate, and it sort of focuses on one, that also, they claim, affected your personality. Have you ever taken a personality test? You probably have. We used to take one at our church, and there were like four animals: a lion, an otter, a beaver, and something else. A lion, otter, beaver, and something else. And you just take a little test. Oh yeah, you're a lion, you're an otter, and yeah.
Have you ever taken the Myers-Briggs?
Probably. I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's like a real psychological one.
Yeah, I've heard of that. That's been around a long time.
Uh-huh.
That's what this is. This was their version of the personality test.
And you say this is related to the doctor?
Yeah, it was the belief. You'll see this in Shakespeare. A lot of poets. It's just so much a part of their lifestyle that they sort of interpreted people this way. But anyway, without having to remember all the details, the second list is more important. These are four good SAT words. The idea is if you had more of this in you than these, then you tended to be maybe a sad and depressed person. That's what melancholy means. If you had more of this in you, however they saw that, then you were more phlegmatic. It's a good word. Slow and passive. You don't respond emotionally to things. If you had more of this in you, however they interpreted that, you would be sanguine. The person you read about, Dave, what's his name? Franklin. Franklin was sanguine, cheerful, and optimistic. But if you had more of this in you, however they interpreted what fire meant, we don't literally have fire in it, but you might be considered choleric, which is irritable. One thing in reading books, they'll talk about his blood was up. Well, I know when I read that, I'm thinking his blood pressure, you mean? Everybody's got blood pressure. But even we still have vestiges of these ideas. But you'll see this idea, for what it's worth, everybody had this in them, and it kind of determined your personality type. So I think these are really good SAT words. If nothing else, you should know, and I will ask you what these 4 words mean. Yeah.
Wait, so
wait.
what does this have to do with the doctor?
Well, this is part of medieval medicine, determining your humors. And if he could figure that out, then he can figure out what disease you have. Like okay, that means this is off balance and so forth. All right, well, I think that's a great example of why you should read classic literature, because we've just spent 10 minutes talking about, and we're reading a book written 700 years ago. We spent 5 or 10 minutes talking about COVID. Last period, we ended up talking about the Black Plague with this. We've talked a little bit about astronomy and astrology, about horoscope. We've learned some vocabulary. So reading classic literature forces you to study other things other than just a good story. So we're going to finish today with, and I hope we have time, we'll go with Bronwyn. She's going to read, oh, by the way, the doctor was very materialistic. He had a deal with the apothecaries. What's an apothecary?
They sell herbs.
Yeah, a pharmacist. All right, so he would send a prescription to the apothecary who would fill it and get paid. So they had this deal going on, you know. And so it mentions that he loved the money aspect, this particular doctor. Not all doctors are in it for the money. I'm sure there's some are, and maybe some aren't. I mean, it's a well-paying job, but some probably are more that way than others, like any. But this guy was. He was more in it for the money. So we're going to end with one of the most famous people in the Canterbury Tales is this character we'll call the wife of Bath, or the woman of Bath. So Bronwyn's going to read about. I'm going to ask you when we're done, and probably have to do it for tomorrow, to write down 6 things about this wife of Bath. I found 11, so I'm only going to ask you to find 6 things about her. Very interesting person, and we'll finish up with Bronwyn, and if we have time, we'll talk about those things.
A worthy woman from beside Bath City was with us, somewhat deaf, which was a pity. In making clothes, she showed so great a bent. She bettered those of Bupress and gin. In all of the parish, not the dame dared stir towards the altar steps in front of her. And if indeed they did, so wrath was she, as to be quite put out of charity. Her kerchiefs were of finely woven ground. I dared have sworn they weighed a good 10 pounds. The one she wore on Sunday on her head, her nose were of the finest scarlet red, and gathered tight her shoes were soft and new. Bold was her face, handsome and red in hue. A worthy woman all her life, what's more, she'd had 5 husbands, all at the church door. Apart from other company and youth, no need just now to speak of that, forsooth. And she had thrice been to Jerusalem, seen many strange rivers and passed over them. She'd been to Rome and also to Allrund, St. James of Compostela, and
Cologne.
And she was skilled in wandering by the way. She had got teeth set widely, truth to say. Easily on an ambling horse she sat, well wimpled up, and on her head a hat as broad as is a buckler or a shield. She had a flowing mantle that concealed large hips, the heels spurred sharply under that. In company she liked to laugh and chat, and knew the remedies for love's mischanges, and art in which she knew the old stances.
So take a minute, thank you. Write down 6 things. I found 11. I'm only going to ask you for 6. Write down 6 characteristics. If they say her job, or personality, or character, or appearance, all are mentioned here. I want you to write it down. Write down the 6 things that you see about it. Well, we have about 1 minute. You didn't have a lot of time to do that, but let's see, I think it'll, if we can do it today, we'll remember it better. Can you think of one thing, Zoe? 5 husbands.
I was gonna say that.
She had a gap in her tooth. Natalie?
She's well traveled.
She traveled. Yes.
She gets a little hostile if someone gets in the way.
She's very proud, aggressive, Dave.
Was he slightly deaf?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
She wore a lot of red.
She was fashionably dressed. Fiona, hang on just a minute. A what? Very sociable. Just to save us some time, you have one last one, Freddie? Freddie got one?
Oh, I said she made clothes.
All right, so all those things, she's probably the most famous character in, well, say famous, she's the most popular because she's so vivid. I would add this, she is a modern woman. You know, she is a businesswoman. She certainly defies convention by being married 5 times. She's a entrepreneur. She travels to the Holy Land. So anyway, I think she's an example of somebody you would see today. She could be transported to today and would fit in. We wouldn't notice anything. You know, she would fit in just fine today because of the kind of person she is. So tomorrow we're going to pick it up here, and we will see you then.